Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast. I'm Gemma Creagh and I'm chatting with filmmaker and artist Bryony Dunne. She's the director of Surrender Your Horns, ahead of its screening at Mermaid Arts Centre, Bray. Thank you so much for chatting with us. This is very exciting to see your really interesting, imaginative, out there take on something that's really reflective of the time that we're in now with regards to climate issues, responsibility. And then there's such a wonderful like sideways view of looking at a topic like this. And there's so much creativity and humor in it. I was just wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about where the idea came from. Or I know I read in your notes that you said that you had read about Sudan, who features in the documentary, but just tell me a little bit about how the idea formulated and how you came to put the pitch together for this.
Yeah. Thank you first, Gemma, for having me. It's really a nice opportunity to be able to share my work with your viewers. And so the idea came about when it was back in 2015, either 15 or 16, when I came across an article in The Guardian about the last northern white male rhinoceros named Sudan, as you mentioned. And the way that this article was written, first of all, the headline above the photo was a picture of loneliness. And Sudan doesn't know how precious he is. And it struck me, not only this kind of like anthropocentric, human-centered viewpoint, but I wanted to know more the background into what brought this rhinoceros or this species to extinction beyond the somewhat the mainstream narratives, which is like the end users in Vietnam or the poachers. And I wondered whether he was lonely long before he ever stood on the brink of extinction, as he was captured from the wild from Sudan at the age of 3, and then he ended up spending most of his life in captivity in a zoo. And whether that kind of loneliness dates back to then, or whether it was just like this rhinoceros in this captive and enclosed within this enclosure, within a wider enclosure. So I started to that struck me, the way that the article was written, and I wanted to look more into the mythology around the animal, and how there's been these accounts of how the unicorn is related to the rhinoceros, and the reinterpretation and misrepresentation of stories, and how that kind of fuels and feeds into the current circumstances of this species. So it was very much it began very much intuitively and independently. When I read this article, I wrote to this Northern White Rhino Committee, and they gave me then permission for a small research trip where I took my camera to film him and the people that took care of him for 10 days. And then one story evolved into another. I filmed as I was working on a lot of other different projects, parts of the story. And it was only at a later stage, fiction, the elements of fiction and reenactment and script became part of the film. But it very much was rooted within the documentary form.
And you had a screening just there in the IFI, and you'll have a screening coming up in the Mermaid Arts Centre as well. So describe what it's like, say, having an idea like that, and then kind of jumping to that end stage where you get to kind of watch it in an audience, and that feeling with it. Does it change shape in your mind at all?
It very much changes shape, I think, when you begin to receive feedback from the audience and their take on it. And you have this idea of what you want to create when you're in the editing process and what you want it to be like, but then and you try and have this other viewpoint with working with others, and try and get all this advice in that like post-production process. But then when it's kind of really, when it goes to a more public audience, it's such a different experience of like how people relate to the work and what, like, for instance, in parts of this, like there's elements of the documentary part that audience think it's like fictionalized, and then there's the documentary parts that vice versa. So it's quite interesting to get that feedback. And I mean, I think it's also with audiences, audiences that they differ as well. I mean, like, depending on whether the audience is kind of presented more to kind of like an art museum gallery context, to maybe like a viewing where it's more related to like nature and conservation. And then it can also change again depending on what, from country to country. So
yes, because there's elements of film, elements documentary, elements of art. There's that kind of like abstract, beautiful images mixed in with a very theatrical performance, and then kind of like bookended in this very surreal like narrative structure. So I love how it molds from one thing to another. You're not even kind of sure. It brings you on this kind of like wild journey, and it kind of feels like the way your mind ping pongs through ideas, and then we're going with a speaker and then we're going back to another speaker. Like it like that. It feels a very kind of creative piece that deals with narrative in such an interesting way. Tell me about that narrative process. So it was an idea, and then you were kind of filming bits and bobs there. When did the Arts Council come on board? What scheme did you put in for funding for?
So the idea of a script and developing a script, it happened at more of a later stage, and that's when I began to look for Arts Council and funding to help me put together and make sense of all this documentary footage. That was probably like, I think it was like just before COVID. I think it was a 2020 a film project, Arts Council Award. And so I applied with the scripted version, but with the documentary elements that were already filmed inside the script. So the script, it allowed me to make sense of all this documentary footage, and there was aspects that I wanted to include in the film, but I wasn't able to do it within the documentary form. For instance, there's one scene of a poacher, and that's based off an interview that I had with a poacher in Kenya. So that is reenacted on stage with an actor, with the kind of a scripted version of that original interview. And then it also allowed, I feel, the kind of voices that are often misrepresented or often unheard in kind of stories that surround this story of the rhino horn trade to be included. As an example, the story of the Irish travelers and how they became part of the story. It was very much a kind of a complicated and challenging confrontation that I was faced with in the film, as in how and if I should bring their story into it. It's a story that kind of brought me back to Ireland, whereas I didn't realize it would take me back to Ireland, a film that I started in Kenya. So I reached out to an actor, John Connors, and we began a conversation on this element of the story. So that part of the script was developed with him. He wrote part of it, and it's a very small scene, but like the script allowed me to open up the story and the narrative to others. To other voices.
That commentary as well, that back and forth that back and forth conversation in the reenactment is very very beautifully written, and the use of language is great. That those kind of traditional like that traveler language, almost like how it's kind of brought in and then translated for the audience, and and the meaning is through it, but also their commentary, their observation on it. And I think that's something that's interesting the whole way through is there's a meta nature to all the elements, where there's what we're watching and then there's like a commentary on what we're watching in what we're watching.
Yeah, and I think the kind of the end scene that the intention is to bring all those perspectives and kind of representation of the story, to bring them all back together in the final scene, and but evidently comment on that this is a script, and the idea of the kind of the end, how we kind of move out of the scene, is to kind of recenter the viewer and kind of question whether and how are we, the audience, part of this story, and also the story is still continuing, and then also to show how we relate and perceive the world and the stories that unfold within it is very much relative to our position within it. And the film is all these different varying perspectives on this story and how they kind of change across time and space, and like, you know, making reference to the medieval hunt of the unicorn, and then it goes into like the contemporary references of hunting, but then there's like 19th century references of big game hunting. And I very much didn't want to claim this position of this is what the story is, this is whose fault it is, or where the story is going. It's very much open-ended, but it's all these different aspects and elements that make up where we are now. And yeah, I mean, it was like, for instance, this is another example of how the script helped to acknowledge my position also within the story. Is like, I wanted to pose certain questions that I had to the reproduction stage that these rhinoceroses are going through with the species, where you have conservationists divided, whereas one group of conservationists want this northern white species brought back to life through in vitro fertilization. But then on the other hand, you have these conservationists that want to just put the resources and funding into the ones and the other species that do exist, because it's a serious amount of money. And in all this like discourse that was circulating around these opposed and positions, is I did want to ask the question, is like, if the rhinos could talk to us, or if we could communicate with them, I just wonder what they would be saying. And through many emails, I wasn't kind of given a response to that when I was communicating, but I was able to do it in the film, and I was able to do it in the script. So that's another example of how the script allowed me to pose these questions. And I mean, another example is that of the idea of staging and reenactment in script. It was like, pre this developing the script, is like the research took me to so many different natural history museums, and where all these thefts were occurring. And for me, these spaces became these problematic and difficult monuments that showed us this relationship that we have to ourselves and to animals, and the idea of kind of like staging and representing this nature, and how humans stage that, and kind of like the idea of then working with the script and the stage. It was like that evolved from these spaces.
And it's wonderful as well how you bring that in, because there's one bit actually when they're at that meal and someone's about to take a bite. And I think it's probably to do with the fact that in a piece like this, the viewer automatically brings their own meaning to so many elements of it, because there's so much strange and wonderful things happening in it. But they're eating, and then someone just pauses and looks at their fork, and you're like, but it is about consuming and consumption. And it is about like even that kind of very masculine obsession with virility. And there was like a conversation about how like, you know, in one of the stories that you told about how, you know, the creature was stopped dead in their tracks by a virgin that they saw, like, and it's, you know, like, I mean, that level of consumption is evident throughout all of this, even in that, you know, our rich character that we're taken in through the eyes of, and who brings us into the narrative is, you know, like living in this kind of lap of luxury in a sense. So there's a lot of commentary there that does link back to environmental issues, about political issues, and it's an interesting take. I'm just wondering, is this something you do you have your meaning in your head as you're going along, that you're like, this, I want to elicit this specific thing, or is it a process for you as an artist to explore? Like, how much do you know and how much are you keeping from us
I
and
mean,
hiding?
yeah, it's kind of like I think for me, film is a medium that allows me to, as a point of inquiry, to confront questions and challenges that I find difficult to understand, but want to understand better. And I think this film, because I also work with sculpture, I work with photography, I also publication. Um, but yeah, I think this film is definitely an example of this kind of curiosity that I have with this relationship with humans and animals, and but it's more so kind of, I feel that the film is more actually about the human condition and humans, and how the plight of the rhinos and this rhino horn trade is at almost this kind of like prism as a way to kind of reflect back on us. And in other works I've that has also occurred, but yeah, I don't know if that answers your questions, but yeah. And it's a continuation. Like what I'm working on now is a continuation of this feature film, and it sometimes happens where I make a film, but then I edit it, but then I take it apart and it becomes a video installation, or then it becomes a publication. But yeah, it's very much this kind of investigation, I suppose, and it begins from, yeah, very much. It's rooted within this kind of research, of this exploratory kind of research of mine. And yeah, I mean, it was filmed over, like, I had been working on it for 8 years, but alongside other projects, where it's like, you know, the scene in Paris where these the Museum of Hunting and Nature, I had wanted to go to this museum and film something. It film something else in that museum, but also I took the opportunity to film inside this museum, because I knew had this rhino horn was stolen from it. So it was kind of, this work along with other works are all kind of like interconnected. But yeah, what you said about the final scene, yeah, it's that idea of kind of, I was actually really inspired by Denis Villeneuve's film called Last Floor, and there's no talking in it. This idea of kind of gluttony and opulence and gorging and consumption, and it's kind of like, it's over the top. It's very theatrical and kind of like, you know, all these like strange animals comes in on kind of trays, and you have like, you know, heads of an elephant and kind of hedgehogs, and it's kind of like all this close up of, and the sound is incredible, of all this kind of like slurping and slithering around. And so yeah, I was inspired by that. And yeah, as you said, there's kind of like this the idea of kind of the consuming, but then it's the idea of kind of consuming this rhino horn, and to try and extract this power of this animal into the human. And that's where the idea of the metamorphosis kind of comes in, and becoming part the kind of attaining that characteristics of that animal, and wanting to take its power by embodying it and consuming it. And yeah, that's how the kind of the beginning of the film, on kind of snorting this rhino horn powder, but then at the very end scene, we arrive at the same the same location, but you have all these different cast members that are there.
And there's something very satisfying about watching them all interact. It's just really enjoyable when you're getting these like kind of like well realized characters, and they're sitting down at the table kind of like thinking about what their role was, but it's fun. Like it's actually really fun. Then tell me about writing the screenplay with Elle. Did you guys was this to submit for the Arts Council funding? Was this something that you'd been doing sort of the whole time as you were going through? Or was this just for the theatrical pieces, or how does that work, the collaboration? Because you have a few great collaborations on this piece as well.
Yeah, I do. I'm very lucky with the people that I collaborated with, and yeah, I mean, it was also my first time working with script, and it was the first time working with a cast in this capacity. I mean, at least, and also working for the first time with a larger crew of like cinematographers and lighting technicians and all that, and yeah, and also realizing the cost of fiction as well. When you're kind of working with documentary, it's something very, very different. And when you're shooting yourself to when you begin to work with fiction, it becomes very, very costly very quickly. And I suppose to some degree there's a lot of risks I took because I simply didn't know. I simply was a little bit naive and unaware of what, to the extent of what was involved. And I felt it was, at times it felt like a fluke on how we managed to do certain things within such a limited budget and within such a limited time. I mean, that final scene that is there, I mean, many people told me that it would take at least 3 days. We did it all in one day. And and half an hour before we were begin to shoot, we only had one camera. And then Eleanor, the Baumann, who was the cinematographer, she one of her friends very quickly came up, Andrew O'Reilly, and then he came in as the second DOP. So he had a camera on the other side. So we managed to get these two perspectives, but it was all yeah, and even the night before, I was cutting back parts of the script to make it a little bit shorter because we could only shoot within that day.
Because there's production design, period pieces. There's kind of a lot of fantasy stuff. It's a very rich lighting tapestry. Like there's a lot to it. I was like, wow, that's a lot.
I but I mean, that was also this kind of. I did the model making. That's my the sculptural parts of the film coming in.
It's a good thing you're so multifaceted, because otherwise saved a few bob.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's kind of with the Arts Council. I mean, it's such a great opportunity to be able to work on something. It's such a privilege to be able to have an organization that takes that risk with the filmmaker and artist to allow them to produce something like this. Because, the treatment and the proposal that we sent in, I mean, it was kind of like, I hadn't filmed any of this fiction. I hadn't done any of the staging parts, any of the parts in the theater. None of that was. It was kind of like showing some of the elements of the documentary, but showing kind of like references of I'm thinking, what I would like to do. Some filmmakers that like this amazing Argentinian filmmaker Lola Ariz, who made this film Theatre of War, and she used all this kind of documentary projected on the backdrop of a theater, and had these kind of reenactments based on the Falklands War, and so it's all these just like references that were put in, and but not being able to kind of like show that. I mean, my films before were all very much kind of documentary, even though there was like a lot of quite experimental, challenging parts of like former works where I'd filmed with like eagles perspective, again kind of challenging all these different perspectives. But yeah, it's I feel very lucky that they took that risk, and I'm yeah, very privileged that I was allowed to, like, I was given this opportunity to make such a work like that. But also, I mean, it's been interesting to try and yeah, the distribution process of this film, whereas like I was a little bit reluctant to call it an artist experimental film for fear of maybe eliminating some audiences. So I did want to play and experiment with the style of fiction, and for me, for the first time, have this opportunity to try. But at the same time, I wanted to make a work that was also still very accessible, and I hope I achieved that.
There's definitely like a coherent thread through it. There's the visuals are very strong. Like it's very much so a kind of cinematic experience in that it's so layered and textured. Like the sound design as well. Like that when they were eating is deeply unpleasant, but like that's the commentary, you know, like that's the purpose of it. But like it's visceral. Like you're kind of you are revulsed in the moment, and you're brought along on this kind of visual interesting ride, and you know, and you do tackle that the subject matter from all these different angles, and how it's, you know, even examined in modern culture, and you know that kind of like hyper like kind of fun element of it, where you know like where you have your dancing sequence, and you know, like that's very much so how it's interpreted now, and I think that's like it's a very interesting thing to watch as a viewer. And I'm just curious to, you know, how even the editing process came. Like when you had it scripted, was it in that order? Or did yourself and George work through it and rejig it? Or was it something that changed the more that you worked on it over the time?
Yeah, it's interesting that the process that we went in to editing. I mean, it was we went in beginning to develop what was already laid out in the script, but then completely open to the possibility that it may be all taken apart, and then in the end, it was very, very close to what was actually laid out in the script. I mean, there was questions whether we would bring the dinner scene all throughout the film, because it's a 7-minute scene at the very end that, I mean, I don't find it long, but like to have a 7-minute in scene is
but
quite
it sort of feels episodic, though. It feels like these little micro chapters that we're going through, like the evolution of the idea, rather than like something that's sort of intertwined. And you know, you maybe ping pong back to one or two in that element, but that's sort of more what it felt like as a viewer.
Yeah, that's really nice that you said that, because that's exactly what it is. It's just all these small little perspectives, which, you know, for me is like, if I find a film interesting and the topics and the subjects that is there, it's like I always end up doing my own research. I want to dig deeper. I want to find out more about the filmmaker. I want to find out more about you know, the stories and the research in it. So I just kind of like hope this is somewhat a film where it will inspire people to look more and do their own research, and just these points of kind of to intrigue our kind of imagination and what's there. And
but it's very interesting, and I think one of the things that really kind of brings it home again is the sound design and the music. So that was Alyssa Moxley.
Yeah, she's an Irish American sound artist that I've worked with on a lot of my films. I met her in Athens and we collaborated there for some time. And yeah, so she was kind of working remotely. I'd done the post-production in Athens.
So it's a real international flavor, but it gave such a kind of energy and vibrancy to the narrative as well. It really kind of worked with it. So you're kind of in the process now where you're watching it being screened. Was there anything, maybe a response that maybe surprised you, or with something that's so kind of open to different interpretations and so from different perspectives? Is there anything like feedback that you've gotten that maybe you weren't expecting, or how it was perceived in a certain way?
I think I've got a lot of very nice positive feedback so far in it. I mean, like the I mean, I showed it first time in the IFI, and I mean, I knew it would come up. Is that the question around the Irish travellers and their role in it? And people wanted to know much more. People wanted to know, to what level did I kind of go down that route? And it's you know what I kind of talked about is that kind of, this is just like, I really didn't want to make it such a large part of this film. It was like one aspect, but there's all these interconnected, entangled kind of stories that are there, and the kind of the Irish element of it and this supposedly Irish traveler connection is just one part, and I didn't want it to make it out to be that kind of like sensational element of the story, which I think I haven't. But I think a lot of people were maybe like, it's such a kind of like a strange turn of events of like, beginning a film that I ended up, the kind of the story took me back to Ireland because of this Irish traveller connection. But I didn't want to make kind of like blow it up and make that such a hyped up part of the film, because I think it possibly, it could have been.
It piques the interest. It is, I think everyone wants to watch the heist film of that on Netflix. I would totally watch that. I would be like,
yeah, it is. It's in, I mean, it's look, it's kind of like and I went down to Rathkeale many times, and just from myself to kind of get a better idea of where supposedly this kind of group was coming from, and in the end I didn't put any footage in there. It was just and I met many different kinds of investigators that were part of this story, and just in the end I also didn't put that in, and it felt more comfortable just working with an actor that identified as a traveler himself, and kind of then the two actors that are in the film, they're also travelers, so it felt that was much more of a kind of a sensitive and acknowledging way to kind of bring their part of the story into it. But yeah, definitely with the audience, they were like, oh, we want to know more about this part of the Rathkeale Rovers and that story of the Irish and the Ireland.
You've traveled the world in this film, and you have, kind of boiled the ocean when it came down to the different perspectives of the topic. Is there anything, if you had like unlimited resources to do the drama elements or to travel, is there anything else that you would have liked to delve into or included or kind of gone into more detail had the scope been there?
I also made this film during part of it during the COVID, during the lockdowns, and which held me back in some ways on being able to visit certain locations that I had wanted to go and visit. Like, for instance, I did want to go to Vietnam, but in the end, I commissioned a videographer to carry out an interview that I wanted to do, and also just to film some parts of the city. But it ended up being actually, I think, nicer this way, to have a local person being able to kind of film their own city and parts that they wanted to show, and this kind of collaboration that again existed, I think in so many parts of the film. And then and then it's like I did want to go back maybe to Kenyan film more there, but then to get kind of just quite shots of landscapes and animals and kind of all that. But then in the end, I asked different scientists and conservationists, the organizations that I was in touch with, whether they would allow me access to their own archive. So what you see is this kind of like surveillance, this tinted kind of green images that are in the film. That's a lot of that is footage that came from these archives, and I thought it added this other layer and this other showing the kind of the perspectives, these different perspectives that's in the film. Whereas like there's one scene where it's kind of like a group of vultures watch this rhinoceros and the baby rhinoceros, and for me this kind of footage was like this almost this kind of allegory or an omen of like possibly like near death, of like the vultures watching for this death. But then like what you hear in the sound is like the two conservationists that are sitting in a jeep filming and photographing this scene, and it's just like endless the camera shotting I mean like hundreds and hundreds of times. And it was very interesting to kind of for me to see the way that they looked and talked about this scene and have that included in the film. So that's all there. And then there's like, for instance, there's a scene in Vietnam where the organization had given me this access to their archive, but I had found one a marathon where it was like Run for Rhinos, where they were trying to raise funds for their organization, and then there's this like rhino that is dressed up, and so then that features in the film. But again, it's kind of like so nice to have this footage included, not just my own footage, but like how other people make and use this kind of educational footage for bring it into the film.
That again is all the perspectives of like the old texts, the people on the ground, the conservationists, the scientists. Like it incorporates that kind of 360 view that you have in the film. So tell me about our upcoming screenings.
The next Irish screening will be in Bray at the Mermaid Theatre, and that screening is to celebrate the 21 years anniversary of the space. And that will be Thursday the 21st in the evening. And there's a few more Irish screenings, but I'm waiting on confirmation of the date. So maybe I want to share it just yet. And then I have a number of screenings outside of the country. So I've recently made an Instagram account. I was a bit late in the day, but it's there.
We'll make sure that's linked in our description as well. And thank you so much for chatting with us. You're so good.
It's so nice to chat to you too, Gemma. Really, it was.